Here?
Here.
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 Let's take a moment for silent reflection and prayer. Amen. Please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, we need a motion to approve the agenda for today.
I move we approve the agenda.
I second.
Yes.
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 And now I will turn it over to Mr. Murray for the Business Services Preliminary Audit Wrap-Up with Auditors.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, board members. It's customary that each year we have our auditors here on site. They're here usually twice during the audit season, physically on site, and then they are conducting the audit from their offices at a remote location for the remaining part of the audit season. So auditors from Heinfeld Meach are here to present preliminary audit information for the district's financials for fiscal year 2023. And Michael Lazan is the representative from Heinfeld Meach, and he'll introduce himself and his team.
All right. Thank you. As Mike said, my name is Michael Lazan. I'm the audit partner with Heinfeld Meach out of the Flagstaff office. And then with me today are these three lovely young ladies who are helping with the audit as well. And so we are currently in kind of the wrap-up phase. We've gotten most of the information. We're still waiting on a few things, and we'll kind of go over that and what's outstanding. But I do want to say thank you to Mike and all of the staff from the finance office and all the various departments that we work with. We audit a lot of information. We pull a lot of paper. One of the things that we're able to get done this year was the district was able to give us our read-only access into the financial system. And so that was really helpful this year and able to us to have direct access to some of the records rather than having to have stuff pulled so frequently. We could actually just log in, and if we wanted to click on a transaction, the support is there. So that was really helpful with the audit process. So we'll probably continue that going forward. But I will emphasize it is read-only access, not we can't push any buttons. Okay, but I will go ahead and get started. And if there's questions, just please let me know, and we will do my best to answer. Okay, we've talked about ourselves before. This is what we do as a firm, Heinfeld Meach. We audit the most school districts in the state of Arizona, not only from the number, but also from attendance standpoints. So this is kind of our focus. So in order to, what the audit encompasses essentially is three different types of audits. So we obviously know about a financial audit. Maybe some of us have had that done for our businesses before, but this is essentially looking at the numbers, making sure that they are correct, that the presentation of the financial statements is in accordance with the governmental accounting standards. So that's kind of what we consider mainly to be a financial audit. Then you also have federal compliance. So because Lake Havasu Unified receives and expends more than $750,000 in federal awards, and with a lot of the COVID grants, it was obviously many times that you're required to have a federal compliance audit. And what this entails is the federal government puts out requirements every year of what the auditor has to look at for certain federal programs, and we're required to essentially select different federal programs potentially each year to test and test compliance with those federal requirements. And then the third audit is what's called the USFR, Uniform System of Financial Records. This is a state compliance audit. And so the state of Arizona has this 240 40 question checklist that we have to go through and say yes or no to all these different areas that may not typically be wrapped up in a financial audit or a federal compliance audit, but the state of Arizona, through the Auditor General, has deemed these areas to be important. So things like attendance, student activities, travel, credit cards, a lot of the transactional type areas where you end up having a lot of hands touch different parts of the transaction. So sometimes that's where the errors pop out. And that actually typically is where we have our most findings. And I'll kind of go through it, but that's where we currently only have findings, is more in that transactional type area versus the large numbers or the federal compliance. So, like I talked about, the USFR, Uniform System Financial Records, we kind of split this up into two different visits. Mr. Murray talked about in September, we were here, and also now here this week. And you can see all the different areas that we have to look at. IGAs, we're reading board minutes, records disposition, transportation, we're verifying the route miles, all the little areas that we kind of touch on that you wouldn't normally touch in a large financial audit. And so we did some of that in our September visit, and then obviously some again recently in this visit. I talked about federal compliance. So there were two federal programs that we tested in fiscal year 23. The first one being what's commonly known as ESSER 1, 2, and 3, Education Stabilization Fund. This is the COVID money that came through. And the second grant we tested was the Child Nutrition Cluster. So previously, under some of the COVID waivers, everybody just kind of ate for free, and there were no applications taken. But fiscal 23 was actually the first year in which everybody in the state of Arizona was back on application. So that was a good year maybe to test that program, since that process had to restart and verifying that all those people were eligible to receive free and reduced lunches. And so the good news is we looked at allowable activities. We're testing that what you're spending the money on is allowable under the grant requirements. We're looking at eligibility, verifying that the students who got free and reduced meals were actually eligible to get those meals. We're looking at certain maintenance of effort, making sure you're doing procurement, you're monitoring equipment. Obviously, that was probably a lot more on the ESSER side of buying different pieces of equipment. And so the good news there, we had one kind of small finding right now where we are kind of trying to tie out a full-time equivalent number that was in an ESSER report, but we're hoping that the district will be able to provide the number that ties out. It's not a huge discrepancy, but it's just something that we have to go through and verify that the FTE that was reported is appropriate. And we're hoping that'll be cleared up before we have to finalize the audit. Financial statement wise, so we look at a lot of disbursements. We test a sample of around 50. That's just the accounts payable, not including the travel and credit cards and all the various areas. And then we also test a sample of about 50 payroll transactions as well, looking at different employees' pay rates and verifying that for federal compliance, that employee was eligible to receive that grant funding, and then also verifying that the appropriate steps were taken as far as having contracts on file and support for all the different pay. And so the good news is we have no findings over either one of those areas, which is good. And so that was in our preliminary visit, our September visit. And then November, now that the numbers are finalized, or mostly finalized at this point, we are kind of pressing hard into cash, capital assets, leave reporting, revenues, receivables. Last year we had a new accounting standard, which was called GASB 87, which had to do with leases, governmental accounting standards. This year we got a new one called SPITAS. So that was under governmental accounting standard number 96. This has to do with all the subscription software that the district has, essentially taking a software that's a multi-term agreement and it becomes an asset and a liability to the district. So we're still working through some of those, trying to verify that, obviously the district has a lot of different software between education and non-education purposes. And so we're looking through those agreements right now and hoping to get a summary of that information. So I wanted to go through a couple areas we noted for potential improvement. So the first one has to do with, in the area of the USFR, the Uniform System Financial Records. The first area that typically has the most findings is student attendance because probably has the most transactions. Think about every kid who comes in late and leaves early. All of that it creates a transaction, and so we have to verify a sample of those. And so some of the findings were concentrated in the AOI, which is still a relatively new program for the district. And so there's just some cleanup that kind of needs to happen in those areas. For 2 of 7 AOI students reviewed, the full-time equivalency statements were not maintained. For all the AOI students reviewed, the district did not determine. One of the things with AOI is you typically, a student enrolls in the typical school. They have 4 or 5 classes. They show up, they take their classes, and then they get their credit, or they essentially you get funded for that. AOI is a little bit different in the fact that the student has to spend so many hours and it has to be documented, and then at the end of that student's curriculum year, you basically have to go back and look and say, okay, should the district get a full funding for the student, or maybe the student who said they were going to take a full credit load only did half of what they were supposed to do, and so you may have to redetermine that FTE potentially. We do a sample of looking for Arizona residency. So we had 5 students who didn't have that proof of residency on file. We're also looking for students who have been withdrawn from the district who just kind of disappear. That's kind of what the 3 of 15 students withdrawn for 10 consecutive absences. They just they leave the district and maybe you don't know where they end up. And so the date that was put on in the system was not correct. And then we're also looking at partial day calculations, and this has to do with, again, the example of talking about a student comes in late or leaves early. That affects what attendance you can claim for that day, and so we recalculate that attendance, and so we did note a few errors in those areas. But this is typically common. Attendance has, of any area in the state of Arizona what the auditor is working on in accordance with the USFR, this always has the most findings. And so it's not a surprise to see them up there. And none of these are significant or severe. Information technology. A couple of these are repeats from the prior year. And so this has to do with the disaster recovery plan, not including all the required elements. And we didn't see a test of the plan performed in 2023, fiscal 23. A lot of even though the Auditor General is requiring that you have essentially multi-factor authentication, a lot of the software systems have not done that yet. And so they are slowly starting to implement multi-factor authentication. I think Visions has an update coming out pretty soon, which is supposedly going to add multi-factor authentication to it. And so finally the software companies are realizing that if they want to stay in business, they need to get these things implemented. And then just some different controls need to be put in place as far as not just who has access to what system, but who can turn access on and off into certain modules within a system, is that last bullet point. A couple other areas we noted for improvement. Couple coding findings. This has to do with the the Uniform System Financial Record has a very detailed book in which they tell you exactly where they want you to code your expenses for payroll and all your revenues and everything else. And so there were 3 transactions we noted which were not coded in accordance with the USFR chart of accounts. And we also did note that due to a lack of a timely review or timely payment process, there was 1 credit card statement, 1 month that did have a late fee and a finance charge assessed on them. And the last area has to do with cash. What I think was typically happening is that sometimes the bank reconciliations were being done. There was maybe a delay, so the reconciliations were being done kind of 3 months at one time. Not exactly timely, and so the USFR requires that bank statements reconciliations to be done monthly, and so just recommending that the district implement that control as well. Okay, as far as before I get into kind of what's outstanding, are there any questions regarding any of the areas we noted? No. Which one was the repeat again? Information technology. All of those were repeats? Yeah. Yeah.
Are you going to let our information technology department know about the problems that they have?
Yes, we have talked to them and let them know of what findings we have. So yes.
As a mainframe engineer, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Anyway, we do always ensure that whenever we do have a finding, we make sure that we talk about it, one, with the department in which the finding occurred and the employee who's kind of in charge of that area. And then we obviously have an exit as well with the business office with Mr. Murray to let him know what findings we have so far. And then at that point, the district is allowed to essentially go back and say, hey, actually, you were wrong, Mr. Auditor. We did have this document, or you did this calculation wrong. And so sometimes a lot of the findings end up being cleared up between when we say we found the finding and when the actual report gets released to the state. So there is the opportunity to clear some of these prior to the report being issued. Okay. Okay, so as far as what's outstanding right now, so we talked about the new accounting standard, subscription-based IT assets. We are still waiting on some of the spreadsheets to come out as far as kind of detailing what we think qualifies as a multi-year agreement under this new accounting standard. But we're hoping that there won't be a lot, that most of them will either be annual agreements or potentially will have certain clauses in them that don't qualify under this accounting standard. There are a few areas where we've made requests, and so we're just waiting on a few pieces of information. Some things like the capital asset stewardship test work, we are going to go out tomorrow at 9 a.m., and Mr. Murray is going to walk us around and help us find some assets. And so hopefully no findings pop out of that, but it's always potentially the case. We're also waiting for some information from the closeout of the internal service fund, your self-insurance plan from 3 or 4 years ago. Finally, that's closed out and all of the money has been dispersed to the new insurance trust. But we just need a few pieces of information as far as what the in and outs represent. And it wasn't clear from the bank statement. So we're still waiting on a few pieces of those information. So then what's next? So we talk about, we'll finalize the test work over the various financial, federal, USFR items. We are here through tomorrow. We started working on site yesterday, and then we'll be here through tomorrow to wrap up any items that are outstanding, hopefully. The report is due, I should have switched the name, it's Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. So that's my fault. I forgot to update the title. That's due December 31st, 2023. We don't anticipate anything causing a delay and not meeting that due date. The district has been able to submit the report timely for many years now, and so we don't see any issues with that. The USFR and the single audit reporting package have a separate deadline of March 31st, but our hope would be to get those pieces at least out to the district for review in December, and then finalize potentially in January if we can come to an agreement on any findings that were written up or documented. So, questions?
Not necessarily a
Yeah.
question, just appreciation. I know you guys do a very thorough job. I just want to point out that having just one very minor finding that could, with FTP related to ESSER, shows that we are really on top of those funds for the community, having nothing in the financial area. And, the things you pointed out in the USFR, I know those are always, you're never going to get, there's always going to be something on those. And I know some of those technology ones that are repeats are also ones that are common, like, the getting everything on two-factor and those types of things are an ongoing process. So I'm looking forward to those not being a repeat next year, but if technology catches up to this. But I do appreciate your work, and of course I appreciate y'all's work too.
Any other discussion? All right, thank you, Mr. Lawson.
Thank you.
All right, moving on, do we have any announcements for today? No, no. All right, then we need a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I move we adjourn.
I will second.
Yes?
Here, yes, I'm sorry.
Here and yes.
Yes.
I will say this meeting is adjourned.